Hello and welcome to this next seminar in the Business Essentials series produced in conjunction with Bournemouth Poole College. This one is how to fail successfully, not catastrophically. I'm Nick Hickson. I'm a chartered and certified accountant and business advisor, and I've been advising businesses in the small and medium-sized sector for about 30 years. Now, in the time-honoured questions session, obviously we can't have questions during the seminar, but please do send me any questions you have. Send them to nick@hicksons, hixsons.co.uk, and I'll do my best to answer them. In the meantime, we will follow the inimitable Ronald Reagan's advice. Before I refuse to take your questions, I have an opening statement. Experts. Niels Bohr, the Danish physicist and Nobel Prize winner, defined an expert as someone who'd made all the mistakes that can be made in a very narrow field. So you obviously need a real expert like me to tell you all about successful failure. But at least that means the expert has explored the full potential of that experience, and we might come back to that idea. Now, the glory of failure is an initiative of the Royal Society of Arts. It sought to discover what we can learn from failure, which is a very emotive word, and what we can use from that to drive success. And this seminar is a function of that Glory of Failure initiative. From that came a book called The Failure Files, which is edited by David Hilson, otherwise known as the Risk Doctor, who has kindly allowed me to borrow elements from his presentation and his book. So let's get straight into it and define what we mean by failure, and then propose some questions. Failure starts when you stop succeeding, which sounds very trite, but it does make sense because we operate within our comfort zone. And within that, we know what we're doing, so we're successful at doing it. But staying in our comfort zone is just plain safe. Will it enable us to survive long term? How can we innovate or grow if we stay in our comfort zones? Clearly we can't. I'm assuming here that growth is a good thing. We may want to discuss that in a later seminar, how we should grow our businesses, or should we mean how should our businesses evolve to cope with changing circumstances. But assuming we think we need to innovate and or grow, we have to push past that comfort zone barrier which invites failure. We have to do something we don't know, or we don't know well enough. There's a difference between our business comfort zones and our own. We have to be able to manage ourselves before we can push our businesses forward. So this is, to some extent, as much about the psychology of helping ourselves through an uncomfortable experience as it is about helping our businesses. And there are some rules for being outside our personal comfort zone which you may find helpful. Most apply to the business comfort zone too. Well, recognise that it will feel, uncomfortable. You're supposed to feel a little out of your depth and experience some stress. Or in your cases, being business people, some more stress. That's normal. To manage this, perhaps you should set step-by-step plans, get immediate feedback so you can measure progress, develop learning and change, and we'll get into the detail of that shortly. When you try something new, try and find a level of challenge that is just higher than your skill set but not wildly above it. The chances of a catastrophic failure are therefore much lower, and it will encourage you to have another go later when you realise just what you're capable of. Also, challenge yourself regularly. You decide when to step out of your comfort zone rather than allowing life or some competitor to do it for you. That way you can control the experience. You have a way back whenever you want. You can keep your confidence topped up. It might help if you work with someone who can provide impartial guidance and advice. You don't necessarily want to get straight back into your comfort zone, which might be the solution that's offered by a close friend or relative. They just want you to feel safe and de-stressed, whereas maybe talking to someone who can just give you a little bit more guidance and push you on comfortably would be better for you. And by the way, that's the sort of thing we do. But this is not all about managing your own psychology. It's much more about tools and strategies for dealing with and learning from failure. At a first sight, failure and success are simple opposites, but the relationship is much more complex than that. Failure starts where success ends, and so it defines the limit of success. So, if you want to explore exactly where your comfort zone, success, ends, you have to push a little bit beyond to find where failure begins. If you don't, you won't be maximising the benefits of your success. Or to quote Mario Andretti, if things seem under control, you're just not going fast enough. But how do we know where the edge is, that line between success and failure? We'll come back to that. Secondly, success often follows failure, and success frequently occurs after all other options have been tried and failed. Well, that's when failure is relatively infrequent, such that a bit of persistence will bring success. But how much persistence? We'll come back to that too. Emerging from this failure zone gives us an enlarged comfort zone in which we can succeed. Here we learn things which were previously hidden to us or unavailable. Persistence is the key, but persistence won't get you to success every time. Sometimes the failure zone is too wide, or at least in the direction we're taking. Perhaps a change of tack might bring better results. When do we know when to do this? Well, we can use sailing as an analogy for business planning in a way. We know where we are, we know where we want to go. It takes a lot of tacking to get there. So, we're getting now to a point where we've got some interesting questions proposed. Where's the edge between success and failure? When and for how long should we persist with failure? In other words, when should we stop? And related to that, which elements are failing? Is it all of it or just part? How will we know which ones to stop? When and in what direction should we change tack? And lastly, what can we learn and how can we use that? I'm quite keen on the learning aspect, which will become very clear. Right, here's some good questions to ask. Now let's look at what characteristics failure has, what its look and feel is. Well, there's a good example. Here's some negatives. It's natural. It's an intrinsic part of life. It's universal. It's found everywhere, affects everything. Inevitable. Perfection is illusory. And there's some pain. There's always some negative consequences, and here's a good few of them. But there's opportunity. It offers the chance to try and make a fresh start and do things differently. There's learning, teaching us that further effort will be wasted, helping us not to repeat the same mistakes. That is, after all, one of the definitions of madness, doing the same thing time after time and expecting a different result. Why would you do that? There's information. It's giving us detail about what not to do. It's directional, closes off some parts, leaves some parts open, which we can explore. There's stimulation. It's encouraging us, challenging us to innovate, which is easy enough if we do step by step, just above our skill set type of work. And there's some fun. Really? Fun? Well, yes, it can give us the freedom to think, act unconventionally. And that's a good thing. We're not stuck in our own routines, stuck in our ruts, getting the same result every time, going slightly mad. So it's got some positive aspects as well as some negative ones. And we must be careful in not polarizing our views about success and failure. It's much more developed as a theme than that. Remember also that some of the negative aspects don't relate to the failure itself, but the fear of failure, which can lead us to be overprotective, preventing us from taking worthwhile risks and opportunities. In other words, not properly exploring our comfort zone sufficiently. If you do want to explore your comfort zones personally, there's a website, www.whatismycomfortzone.com. Nothing in between, it's one word, what is my comfort zone. So that's what the look and feel of failure. What sort of types of, what do I mean by that? What sort of types of failure can there be? Well, it could be an absolute failure. Does it succeed or not? Is it simple pass or fail? Or perhaps there's a relative failure, something that's below some threshold or failed to reach some desired standard. We could expand on that perhaps. Could be a technical failure. Just doesn't work. Could be a competence failure. I can't do it. Well, I've got children, and I warn you now that if you come to me and say I can't do it, I will quote what my darling children got quoted at regularly. Do you mean you can't do it yet? Or you won't do it? Now, of course, they tended to shy away from the won't do it because that had some consequences. So can't do it yet just means need a bit more practice, need a bit more effort, bit of persistence. So think about the issue of competence when you say I can't do it. Well, should you learn? Should you persist a bit? Or is it something you won't do for a good reason? Next, parameter failure. It's okay, except it's late, it's over budget, a bit slow, things like that. Well, there's a hierarchical failure, and that's quite common in a lot of organisations where a project is on time, is on budget, full specification, doesn't quite deliver the expected value. So it's okay for you because you've designed it and it's doing what it says, but it's not okay for me because it's not getting me the return I was expecting. Or purely subjective, I just don't like it. So how do we deal with failure? Well, we could start with resilience. And resilience is the ability to bounce back, to persist, to get back quickly and completely to your original state. And resilient people tend to be able to take in their stride whatever life throws at them. And they also tend to be more able to adapt to new situations and willing to embrace them. Entrepreneurs tend to be quite resilient. You can test your resilience at this website, www.testyourrq.com, and I suggest you do that. You get a nice description about what you might be feeling and what you may not be feeling. Test it again every 6 weeks, every couple of months, and see whether your resilience is improving or not, because that could be quite interesting for you. Now, resilient businesses have a shared corporate culture, robust processes and values that allows the business to absorb unforeseen changes. Typical example is a business continuity or disaster recovery plan. Although resilient processes should be built in throughout the organisation, hopefully, so that you don't have to invoke such plans. And those that survive are not necessarily the cleverest, the strongest or the most talented. They're the ones who continue to turn up, which is why you have here a picture of my daughter Alexandra with her dance partner Andre. They are amateur ballroom dancers. Now, Andre and Alexandra, otherwise known as Team Andrex, soft strong with a sadly incredibly long amateur career. Desperately like them to turn professional and stop draining my and their mother's resources as soon as possible. But I remember talking to Alexandra, now nearly 26, when she was 15 and still dead keen on the dance career. And I said to her then, world champions, which is where she wants to be, are not necessarily always the most talented people at your age or even older. Some of those very talented people will get fed up and stop for whatever reason. They'll discover boys or some academic career or something else will take their fancy, or they'll just get tired. World champions are the ones who will always turn up. Now, fortunately, they are ranked number 3 in the world, and we're looking forward to that improving to number 1 and turning professional and saving me a shed load of money, which would be great. How can you help your resilience? Well, your mindset helps. Failure is inevitable and natural, so we should be able to accept and expect failure. But should we persist or not? That's not normally black and white. But measurements, more of that later, will help. The positive aspects of failure, coupled with a natural entrepreneurial optimism, which is a bit of a euphemism, may encourage us beyond any point of realistic optimism, such that we need to recognise wishful thinking for what it is, euphemism now removed, and rely upon the facts as we know them. Should we adopt a Churchillian quotation, if we're going through hell, keep going? Or should we think more about a W.C. Fields quotation, If at first you don't succeed, try again. Then quit. There's no point in being a damn fool about it. We don't know yet. We can minimize the failure, because it's not our goal to fail. So we need to employ some risk management, project management techniques to help. Proper project management involves setting clearly defined goals and milestones to measure them. Perhaps you should do that. A good part of what we discussed in one of the earlier seminars, How to Innovate, relates to this. Remember Mike Tyson? The first plan will fail. He said, if you remember, everyone has a plan until they get punched in the face. So, experiment. Are we doing something which is plausible and economically scalable with this new thing? Can we correct the course of this experiment should we need to? Can we achieve early profitability as a test and reduce our risk? And what are the ideas 4 P's of innovation? Population, price, penetration and purchase frequency. Remembering always to solve for penetration last. Decide how big your population is. You'll know what you think your price point should be. You know how often they ought to purchase from you. Penetration, the amount of people out of your population who will buy your goods or services, is the last thing you solve for, because that's the key one. And while we're thinking about it, are you measuring existing projects and sales lines like this already? And if not, why not? What are the most critical assumptions? What does success look like when you've done it? And then what are the 2 critical things necessary to make it happen? Can we launch this in miniature to learn about it or simulate it in some way? Can we do an everyday experiment just to see whether our assumptions are valid? And measure everything. Do the detail. Entrepreneurs, please note. Test assumptions. Entrepreneurs, please note. An issue may be the need to resource this. Now we're in a recession. Been there for some while. We've cut things. We don't have any fat on our bones in any of our organizations anymore. We don't have excess resource. And one of the ways in which you can, or one of the key ways in which you need to change something, you need excess management resource to do that. And there's been studies on this. The most commonly quoted is Edith Penrose, who was an English economist, in the 1996 paper, which I think is in the Journal of European Management, but that's entirely from memory. You need excess management capacity so that you can do some change. Well, here's a hint. That's what we help with. And enjoy surprises. Don't just measure for the negatives. I used to get very, very fed up with my staff when they were producing sets of accounts, and we do something called a variance analysis. We compare this year and last year, and they would write down all that, and they would then have to explain why these things had changed. And most of the ones, people, not just my staff, but in business, they look at all the negatives. They say, well, that's gone down. Why has that gone down? Oh, this has gone wrong. That's gone wrong. This has changed. Had to change supplier. The price went up. All that stuff. But occasionally things go up. You see sales lines going up, and they think, oh, that's good. And then start looking at what's gone down again. Well, catch yourself doing something right. Get right into the raw data, find out why those sales went up, and go and do some more of it if that's appropriate. Direct resources to things which work. So enjoy. That's a surprise you really want to enjoy. So, in summary, make small bets. Don't bet the house. Be clear what your customers think is important. Ask them. Measure everything. Test your assumptions. And to be absolutely clear, make sure you explore the details in your assumptions, because people tend not to. We're going to sell £10,000 worth of new product. Really? How many at what price point equals £10,000, please? Everything is a function of volume and price. So if you split it like that, you can then see which thing has changed and make some decision about that. You can't just say, oh, we've only sold £9,000 worth, that's a failure. If the price point is wrong or the volume assumption was wrong, you can change those things and retest it, see whether if you drop the price or even increase the price, you get a better result. So please make sure you test your assumptions and split them into volume and price. If you're struggling with pricing, there is a video, 14 ways to raise your prices and keep your customers. Please do go and watch it. Now, how do you make small bets? Well, you can do it like an auction. You can decide in advance how much you're willing to lose. That's the allowable loss. Stick to it. Don't be seduced into giving it one more try. Decide what customer-centric measures are critical. Measure them. If the numbers work, keep going. Don't get stuck on ego-bound ideas. Be humble. Ask everyone else in the organisation for input and listen to it. Do you fundamentally want staff or do you want colleagues? I said staff earlier. I really meant colleagues, because they're the ones who are doing the work. They're the ones who understand how the machine works exactly. They're the ones who've had the conversation with the customer. They're the ones who've banged on all those doors. Find out what they know. Try and think of it possibly not just as the standard pyramidal hierarchical order where you're at the top at the pointy bit and then there's your managers and your staff and junior staff further down in the fatter part of the pyramid. Think of it the other way around. Right at the top, customers, they're royalty, they're the kings and queens. Just under that, there's your customer-facing staff, and they're your minor royalty. And further down, and further down, and further down, and right at the bottom, in the pointy bit, right at the bottom, is you. You're the service leader. You exist to enable, by your systems and processes and management ideas, to enable the minor royalty to get the kings and queens to pay everybody's wages, including yours. So, maximize the value of failure. Gain as much advantage and information as you can. You've got a range of lessons from the failure. Capture them and learn from them. Build up a body of evidence, based wisdom, experience to inform your futures. Make sure you build in learning time. And that's good project management. And what's the worst? Can you ring fence it to it doesn't infect the rest, and can you live with that? Now, measure everything. Plan for the unexpected, not just the optimistic version, entrepreneurs. Please note, do a SWOT analysis, strengths, weaknesses, opportunities and threats. Strengths and weaknesses are internal, opportunities and threats are external things. Run what-if scenarios on everything, not just the sales, but the gross margin and the capacity and a few other things, just so you understand better how your business works at different levels so that you can make better decisions. I'm afraid I can't help you too much here because your measurement method will depend upon your project. In particular, the critical assumptions that you've set, which may be the number of extra sales, the sales value, the new customers that you've gained, but find ways of measuring that. Most of it will not just come from your bookkeeping system, which is historical. But, key thing here, measure to the decision, don't get hooked up on the number. Measurement systems are not necessarily needed to be designed to give you an absolute answer when all you need to know is whether you need to change your decision. You can let yourself be guided by what the number isn't rather than having to know what it is. Here's an example which may help. Enrico Fermi, another Nobel Prize winner, lecturing at the University of Chicago to undergraduate students in the 1930s. So, context, Chicago, 1930s. Undergraduates, bit thick. And he just set them an estimation example because he was a little bit bothered that they couldn't do this sort of thing. And he said, I want to know how many piano tuners there are in Chicago. The only known fact is that there are approximately 3 million people in Chicago right now in the 1930s. What's your best guess? Now, he used this actually as a simple statistical and probability idea, but we can use it as well. We can say, right, let's make some guesses. 3 million people, 750,000 homes. Yeah. Man, woman, 2 children. Maybe a fifth of those have got pianos, including music halls, cinemas, pubs, churches, and so. Let's say there's about 150,000 pianos in Chicago, and these are fairly chunky, simple assumptions. Now let's say that pianos are tuned once a year, and a piano tuner has got to go to the premises, so some travel time. He's got to have a little bit of a chit-chat, of course. He's got to tune the piano, which takes whatever time it takes, bit of a chit-chat at the end, and then travel to the next place. So let's say he can only tune 5 pianos a day. So that's 30,000. Let's say there's 365 days in a year. Take off all the weekends, take off a bit of holiday and a bit of downtime for perhaps some illness or whatever. 240 available days. Divide that into the 30,000 means 125 piano tuners. Let's round it to 150. Not that it really makes any odds. Now let's put some context into these fairly woolly assumptions. Let's say I am a manufacturer of extremely good tuning forks, far better than anything else that's on the market now, and piano tuners would like these things. I am considering putting a salesman into the Chicago area to sell these magnificent tuning forks to all the piano tuners I can find, because there's no Yellow Pages or Google or anything like that. I've got to go and find them. Now we're dealing with things we can pin down quite reasonably. We can say, I know how much it costs to make a tuning fork, and I know how much they sell for, because I do that. I know pretty accurately how much it's going to cost me to put a salesman into Chicago for a year. So I know how many tuning forks with reasonable accuracy I need to be able to sell to make it worth my while doing that. And if that number's 500, and if my extremely rough and ready idea of how many piano tuners is 125, and I know that's wrong, but I also know it's not wrong enough to change my decision, which will be, I'm not going to do it. So you can measure to the decision, not to the number, because some things you will know, which are generally the internal stuff. The other stuff you can make a stab at. Now you know you're making a stab, so you know you've got to put a big fudge factor on it either way. But if you put a big fudge factor on it and it still doesn't change the decision, you don't need to measure it anymore. You're there. That's what I mean by that. And I think that's reasonable. You can have a reasonable stab at that without too much effort. So you can have a measure which not tells you when to stop, but also when to start stopping, so you don't overrun too far into failure and waste resources. And a good foundation, and I don't mean just a bookkeeping system, will help you measure changes and give you a reality check and know you when to push on, when to change direction, in what direction, and when to stop. One of the things we do, or accountants used to do, we don't do anymore, some still do sadly, they produce annual accounts sometime after the year end, and sometime after that they will talk to their client and just say, oh look, Mr. Jones, terribly sorry, but in looking at your accounts we noticed you made a mistake 9 months ago. It cost you £1,000, and you seem to have been making that mistake every month ever since. Terribly sorry, but I have to tell you you've lost £9,000. Oh, by the way, here's my bill, which is going to go down like a lead balloon, isn't it? Which, of course it is. So you need a bookkeeping system which is up to date and accurate, starters. But your measurement system should also help you with determining when you're at the edge between success and potential failure. And for that, you need some structure to look forward, not just back, because all bookkeeping systems are historical, because you can't be recording things which haven't happened yet. Even if it's happened yesterday, it's still historical. One way of doing this is by a split of key success factors and key performance indicators and performance indicators, so that you have like a 5-year plan, quite aspirational, but it says we want to be over there, and the key things we have to do to achieve that are these 6 or 7 or maybe 10 at maximum. And we measure that by saying in our business plan, which is our 12-month more detailed plan, these 5 things. So we need to know, say, the sales per product needs to be this per month, the gross margin needs to be that per month. Maybe we've got something which is we're manufacturing something, so it's the manufacturing downtime is important to us. Maybe it's a sales-based thing, so it's commissions, sales commissions, or the advertising we have to put in to generate that level of sales. Those are key to doing that. Do more advertising, we tend to get more sales, and they're in a reasonably correlated relationship. So from these we can decide on the key performance indicators, which looking forward month by month. Now, a performance indicator is something which has happened, so bookkeeping system. So we will know that we have to sell, let's say, £10,000 worth of goods A in every month to hit our target for that year, which hits part of the target for our 5-year plan. If our bookkeeping system tells us after week 2 of the month we've sold 3,000, we've got enough information to make sure we put a bit more resource into selling more of that good in that month so that we hit our target. It's that sort of way of telling us when to start, when to stop, and when to put a bit of extra effort into it. That's quite useful. So that should give you some help in determining when you're at the edge between success and potential failure. And of course, remember, every time you do something new, some innovation, especially an outward-facing one, not just a process innovation that's internal to your organisation, you must be, by definition, at the edge between success and potential failure. So, when to stop is now getting a lot clearer. It's when the risk of loss that your measurement system tells you is too great, or the profit is too small to bother with. Measurements tell you that. When you've stopped learning, or the cost of extra learning is too high, and when the risks outweigh the benefits. So, when do you stop? When do you stop old projects and sales lines? Well, as before, those things measure those things too. But also maybe evaluate using a Pareto measure. Do 20% of customers or products give you 80% of sales? Also, do 20% of customers give you 80% of the aggravation in your business? Do they clog up your business so you cannot use that resource, that time, to go and get 20% more better customers? What would happen if you drop some? I mean, we do. I'll tell you now, quite truthfully and honestly, we lose clients deliberately annually. We don't just innovate annually, we drop customers annually. And we encourage our clients to do the same. Now, we don't do it in a nasty way at all, and we don't encourage our clients to drop their customers in a nasty way. But if our business is strategically positioned to do this type of work, and for whatever reason our customer doesn't fit that anymore, they could be winding down ready for retirement, they could be going in a completely different direction, they could have moved and it's just inconvenient, whatever, then it's incumbent on us to find them a solution which works best for them, which may not be us. So we will recommend that, very nicely, that they go and see some recommended accountants that we have who can possibly deal with their affairs more efficiently for them and possibly a little bit cheaper, because they're not buying services they don't need anymore. We also tell them every time that if they need something, because we have a good relationship with these recommended accountants, every time that if they need us for whatever reason, they've just got to pick up the phone. and we will be happy to deal with that particular aspect of their affairs again until either it grows and it comes back to us, or we just hand it back to the recommended accountant. It just keeps them getting the best result for them, and it stops us wasting resources on people where we're not getting the best result for either of us. So I think it's worthwhile, because the better use of resources for the remaining customers ensures we have better relationships with them, we've got more time, we've got more sales opportunities, and we get better margins. Every time we do this, we make more money. Now, here's another idea. Don't take all the sales you can. Make sure they fit your company plan and way of working. Now, in these days of recession, we're generally rushing around trying to get every sale we possibly can. Well, I tell you again, very honestly, out of the 3 or 4 people that come to us and say, we'd be interested in you dealing with our accounts, financial affairs and business advice, we'd probably take 1 of them, because we do not fit we discuss it thoroughly. If we don't fit what they really want, we won't take them. We will not take people who are going to become dissatisfied with us. It's foolish. And furthermore, we're wasting resource which could be used on other people, etc., as I've told you. Too often businesses take anything that's going, they spread themselves far too thinly, and that leaves them at risk of many competitors, all of whom who do more in each little market than the small business is trying to get into. It's the bright shiny objects problem. Oh, I can do that, and I get a little sale here and a little sale there, and you don't really understand the market enough. As a small business, you can compete with the big boys. And you do that by filling your market niche. Competitors can then only buy their way in, and you've no chance of being a busy fool. Less work, more profit. This quote here, the more we focused and said no, the more we grew, comes from the US. It comes from a national, I think now, supplier of alarm systems in the domestic market, and that's all they do. Do nothing else, going for 20 odd years, and they are very, very profitable, very, very successful, because they're very, very focused. And remember, when you're doing your marketing and your advertising and all the rest of it, marketing isn't about getting customers. Marketing and advertising is about getting the right customers, ones who will be happy with you, who will happily pay you, and will not cause you a huge amount of grief. Now, one of the key benefits, I've told you before, is that you can learn even if you fail. Good project management dictates that at the end of every project there's reflection time. At least a wash-up meeting between all the project members, so they can discuss what's gone well, what's gone wrong, and what can be done about it in the future. Normally a project team, if you have such a thing, comes from many different disciplines. They do the project, and then they go back to their departments. So all the knowledge dissipates if you're not careful. So document it. Doesn't need to be good English, just bullet points will do. The important thing is to disseminate the document so that everybody, not just the project team, can learn from it. Been lots of examples when I was at a seminar done by David Hilson, in actual fact, after the RSA's Glory of Failure initiative. One of the other attendees at the end said, this happened to us. I was working at the Ministry of Defence. For Royal Naval Procurement, we had a project team for an IT system. We came together, we did all the work, we made whatever recommendations we made, and we went back to our departments. There was no wash-up time. 5 years later, a similar type of project came about. New project team was formed, not all the same people. People had moved department, moved differently in the MOD, left, had babies, whatever. They went through much the same discussion, much the same work as under the first one, and because of that, they lost £25 million because they had to reinvent the wheel. Very irritating. Now, make sure you have reflection time, make sure you document it, make sure you tell people. Now, one way of doing this is to write case histories, and I'm really keen on my clients to write case histories. Case histories have a number of benefits. They're internal documents to record what's gone on in any new project so that everyone can learn from it. Told you that. Marketing tool on your website, slightly rewritten, and you can give it to customers. That's useful as well. You're showing people your expertise. You're showing people you can fill your market niche, and you should be the go-to people. But it's important, whatever way, you produce something for the collective memory so the organisation doesn't have to repeat mistakes just because Bob has now left and taken all his experience with him. This is probably an apocryphal story, and I read it decades ago, and it was old then. It's about a power station, and the power station was at the bottom of a dam, great big dam, and one day the power station stopped, so everybody down the valley went dark. No electricity. There were murmurings of discontent, which quickly turned to grumblings and shouts, fairly obviously. And everybody in the power station got together and they all had a good chinwag and chewed over what could be done and should be done, and everybody had their different views, and there were experts of this and experts on that, and so on and so off. It went on and on. And eventually somebody thought, let's ask Bob. Bob used to work as a plant engineer and was retired a few years, but he didn't live far away, so somebody rang up Bob and said, would you mind coming down and telling us what you think? So Bob puts the phone down, puts his coat on, gets into his pickup and trundles down the track down to the power station, and they all crowd round him and they all have their different views as to what the problem is and what the solution should be, and Bob just looks at them and grunts and walks over to the great big toolbox, takes out the biggest spanner you've ever seen in your life and stomps off into the deep, dark, cavernous recesses of the plant room. And you can hear his footsteps receding into this great big expanse for a minute or two, and then suddenly there's the most almighty clang, and all the lights come on and the plant's working, and here comes Bob. You can hear his footsteps approaching, and everybody crowds around him and tells him how wonderful he is, and the president of the power company says how grateful they are, and please put your bill in due course because we're so happy. Bob trots off back to his truck, back up the track, and a couple of days later he sends in his bill for £2,005. And the president of the power company looks at this bill and says, well, this is ridiculous, she's only here 5 minutes. So he queries it, and Bob writes back and says, hitting pipe £5. Knowing which pipe to hit, £2,000. And that is the power of a collective memory if you get it right. We put all sorts of marketing case studies on our website. We put this one on. We helped a waste disposal and recycling centre to quadruple profits with no increase in sales. That sounds quite interesting. How did you manage that, Hickson? Well, you pick up the phone and I might just tell you. But that's what happens. It provides a little teaser, pulls people in. At the same time, we've written the case history and it's available to everybody in the office as well, so they can see what we've done and how we've done it. Now, when you're doing these things and writing this stuff, especially the stuff that's for the website or for the marketing aspect, beware expert-induced amnesia. What you're trying to find out here is you're trying to showcase how you think about problems, because that insight can be adapted and implemented for existing problems, even if the solution is not the same. It's the how you think about things is important. So beware expert-induced amnesia. You're writing to other people who by definition don't know what you know. So write as though you're telling a customer. Now, that helps with what not to do next time. And it keeps the knowledge in the business family and helps with a bit of marketing too. So, here we are. Conclusion. We now know pretty much where the edge between success and failure is, how to measure it, how to learn from it, when to stop the new and the old, and when to persist and how to change tack. And I hope we know not to fear failure, because it's good for us in its way. Thanks so much for listening. Any questions? As I said before, nick@Hicksons, HIXSONS.co.uk. Thanks very much.